On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program the director, Ken Burns, the director, co-director, I should say, with Sarah Burns and David McMahon of the Central Park Five. Ken, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I watched the film last night. It is an incredible documentary. It is in many respects heartbreaking and enraging. Um, it is, of course, the story of five then teenagers who were in many. I don't know how else to put this. They were railroaded and through their coerced confessions, were held accountable and imprisoned for years for a horrible assault and rape of a woman in Central Park that took place back in 1989. Tell us how you decided, how you came about making this film, choosing this topic.
Really, the subject was born in my own daughter's sense of outrage and fairness. She had became familiar with this case in 2003 when the five had been recently exonerated. A lot of good it did them because they'd served out their full sentences. And she became passionately interested in trying to tell the story that wasn't told. Those people who will remember 1989 was a real feeding frenzy, not just mistakes by cops and prosecutors, but clearly mistakes by the media who bought the scenario that the cops and prosecutors promoted hook, line, and sinker without the usual skepticism that journalism sort of requires us to do. And had anyone applied that skepticism, cops, prosecutors, or media, the five would not have been in the position they were, which is serving up to 13 years of a sentence. And she decided to write a book, and her husband, David McMahon, and I had the great privilege of looking over her shoulder as she was beginning to work on that, and looked at each other, all three of us, and said, my goodness, it's a film, too. And so we worked for several years. Her book came out last year in 2011. Our film has just been released theatrically around the country. And it's just an attempt to give voice to the five who were denied a voice at the time. They were turned into pariahs. They were the wolf pack wilding bunch of beasts and animals, the language of Jim Crow America at the beginning of the 20th century, not the progressive city that New York supposedly was at the end of the 20th century, and to also ask some tough questions about what actually happened. Why did this miscarriage of justice take place?
You know, there's so many facets about this because the stories of these individual now men is just so it's so painful.
It is. It is. I think that heartbreak is a really good word to use. One is outraged, I think, when one sees the way in which the noose tightened around them without any apparent help. Their attorneys, with the exception of one, were essentially useless. Their community turned against them. In some cases, their own family members turned against them, and they were innocent. They were young kids who'd done pretty well, lower middle class in school. They hadn't done anything wrong, and they didn't know about lawyering up. But there were a lot of kids in the park that night making mischief. There was one other felony committed that they may or may not have witnessed. But what we know for sure happened that night is they weren't involved with the infamous Central Park jogger rape. Someone else did it. And the cops blew it. They had his name 2 days before on another assault and didn't follow through. And then this guy went on, because they became so focused on the five, this guy went on to rape and maim and even kill a pregnant woman before he was not caught by the police, but by people in the community. And no one in that same summer of 89 thought, well, geez, these kids don't know anything about this crime. Maybe this unknown semen sample that we have matches. And they didn't walk it from one case to another. There were detectives working both cases. And so what happens is this becomes tragedy compounded. It becomes tragedy, obviously, for the five, obviously for the original victim of the rape, but it's also their family, and each one of the five has a special hell that they have to live through with their own families that challenges them to the very core of their being. And, our film was just an attempt to say, who are you and what actually happened that night.
I think it also, I mean, it certainly, in some ways, I mean, that is the focus of the film. But what happens or happened for me is when you see this sort of this mirror come up. Now, I didn't live in New York City at the time in 1989. I did live in New York City in 2002. As someone who was living in Massachusetts at the time in 1989, I knew more about the attack than I never knew about the exoneration. And it struck me, I mean, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you, just for, I guess, sort of from a filmmaking standpoint, but I wanted to bring into the sort of this dynamic is early on. I mean, at the opening of the film, you play the confession from the actual rapist who was also had like you say had gone on to kill other people. What was from a filmmaking standpoint, was that to bring out sort of the tragedy from the beginning? Because I didn't even realize that these people had been exonerated, and which was that much more sort of it was that much more painful and made me feel sick.
This is part of our complicity, and I really mean our complicity, because I lived in New Hampshire at the time. I spent some time in New York. I was aware of what was going on. It was the crime of the century, Ed Koch said. The coverage was not just, saturation coverage in New York City, but around the country, and indeed the world picked up on this as a symbol of the decay of the cities, the lawlessness of the cities, how much we'd lost control of our youth, when in fact the crime was committed by a sociopath, a psychopathic guy. And he, strangely enough, is a guy who comes forward and admits his mistake, something that the city of New York hasn't done, or the cops or the prosecutors haven't done, or even the media for that matter. I was aware, too, of how little coverage happened when they were exonerated, and that enraged me, as it would later enrage Sarah. I think that this is, what we did is we decided to move the confession to the beginning, so that no matter what you believe going in, what you knew or didn't know, you knew that there was an alternative narrative that could have been presented at the time, and that you get far enough away from that original confession that maybe you haven't forgotten it, but by the time Mateus Reyes is the name of the man shows up again, you're in full outrage, because you realize not only has what happened to the boys been so unfortunate, but that there is somebody who's right before them, that right before their eyes, that they have in jail that summer, that did it, and they can't see more than the blinders of their scenario have put on them, and we felt it was an important device, so that when they are exonerated at the end of the film, and it's no news story. It's just that it has more power. This is less a question of who done it than a question of how could this have possibly happened the way it did. And that's why the film is structured as it is. And people go through many, many stages of anger and outrage, the sense of fairness that struck Sarah so strongly, and the rest of us, but also the emotions, the heartbreak that you mentioned. All of those you go through in a way as you begin to realize, there, but for the grace of God, go I.
When you speak of our complicity, one thing that also occurred to me during the film, after the film, is a comparison to there were two films made about the so-called Memphis Three. These were three young white teenagers in Memphis.
The West Memphis Three, and there's actually been 3-4 films made about them. And you begin to realize that these failures of justice happen all the time in America. And it's interesting that in that case, and part of the celebrity of that is that they're white kids.
Yes.
The problem is that these are black and Hispanic kids, and for them the anonymity is even more painful. This happens all the time, and we have to figure out as a country whether liberty and justice for all is just the window dressing of our Pledge of Allegiance or something that's real that we have to insist on. And I think that that's got to be front and center. There are too many people that have been exonerated by the Innocence Project and by DNA. There are too many people that have confessions coerced or either make false confessions for a variety of complicated reasons that we might not believe that are possible, and certainly don't believe that we'd be possible of it, but you never know what would happen in the stress of interrogations. And remember, these were 14, 15, 16-year-old kids who were in interrogations with the finest that New York had to offer for upwards of 30 hours by themselves, usually without their parents, certainly without a lawyer, and that's terrifying.
And I was also struck by the guilt that I think Santana's father felt. Just involved. I mean, he clearly, he felt guilty just because he had told his kid to go play in the park that night. But also, I mean, I think there was a real sense that the parents. I mean, when you talk about the sort of the unequal justice and the sort of the resources and the facilities that that these kids had at their disposal. They had horrible lawyers, almost short of one.
Yep.
They had parents who didn't necessarily know how to.
Nobody knew how to work in the system, and nobody understood their rights. And each one was, as I said, a separate tragedy of parents hoping to help, but ending up being in some ways feeling tremendously guilty because they had engineered or helped to engineer or encouraged the cooperation that would result in these confessions and these videotape statements at the end of hours and hours of interrogation that would essentially hang these kids, that no matter the fact that there were inconsistencies, no matter that there was this unknown semen sample, regardless of the fact that there was no DNA match to anything. This is a hugely bloody crime scene, and there was nothing of the crime scene on the boys and nothing of the boys on the crime scene. And so you would think that all of this exculpatory evidence would be just that would at least permit somebody, even if they were locked and loaded on these five, to entertain, at least professionally, you would think it would be part of your job description to entertain alternative narratives. Just like a chess master has to say, well, there's several different ways that I could approach this. And it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And that, to me, is the tragedy, and it's compounded by the fact that the parents were all there hoping to do the best, being overwhelmed by the system, having jobs and other kids that they had to take care of, and being essentially all manipulated by the fact that nobody was there saying, you have rights. You don't have to say anything.
No one from the city, none of the detectives, none of the prosecutors involved in this case would speak to you, and you made that clear up front.
Yeah, we said it. It was very unfortunate. We would have been happy to have all voices in the film, and in fact, we do, because we went out of our way archivally to find out what they were saying in news conferences and press releases and trial statements and things like that. And we interviewed lots of other journalists who covered the trial at the time, and so we feel we did them justice. But they said they hid behind the skirts of the civil suit that the five had launched against the city in 2003, nearly a decade ago, which, by the way, has had the worst case of the slows put on it. It's just, they've just...
It's still ongoing. Still ongoing.
Oh, yeah, they've dumped huge requests on the five that they can't, asking Raymond Santana's father for his entire employment history and his entire medical records, and then they themselves are not forthcoming with just simple notes that detectives are required to take and are required to file, and all of a sudden they can't find them or they're delayed, and judges have gotten exasperated at the slow pace of that. But they were just trapped in this story, and that's the thing that is so frustrating when you look at it. This is a tragedy that did not have to happen.
In the course of your filmmaking and your daughter's research for her book, did you guys ever get the sense or hear through back channels or have off-the-record conversations where any of the people who were involved in sending these five to jail from anywhere from 7 to 12, 15 years, did any of them express any remorse? Did any of them say that we just got caught up in the system, or was there any indication that this is just the way that we would do police work at that time?
let me be very, very careful. The principal detectives and assistant DAs have in no way in their back channel, so to speak, their off-the-record comments in any way indicated any remorse, any sort of sense of regret at what took place. They are continuing to insist that this took place all in good faith. But you can't have a 14-year-old kid, under police interrogation for 14, 15 hours or up to 30 hours, get the wrong confession out, let the real guy go, and call this in good faith. And lie on the stand about it, which they all perjured themselves on the stand by saying that they didn't lead these kids into anything. They just asked them what happened. And if it takes 30 hours to get what happened, you know damn well that that's not the case. There have been others, though, who are constrained and unable to speak, who have spoken off the records and indicate a sense that, that department has egg on its face, that they made a mistake, that this has been a terrible travesty of justice. But I have to sort of be careful because off-the-record comments made to journalists, which we are, have to remain that way.
And in fact, the city is subpoenaing some of your footage, is my understanding. And if you can't speak,
they've subpoenaed all of our outtakes and our notes from this production, which is an incredibly outrageous part for a number of reasons. One, it's an obvious violation of our journalistic privileges. It's a violation of the First Amendment. It's a violation of the New York Journalistic Shield laws. It's a huge fishing expedition intended only to find, inconsistencies between comments that the boys have made, like, listen, Sam, you told me you went into the park at 9:01. You told Burns and McMahon that you went at 9:02. Do you always lie? And it also is yet another cynical gesture that is keeping this tragedy from having a period put at the end of it. Just having closure is important, not just for the victim, not just for the five and their families, but for the city of New York. Yes. And what this is a failure, as the reporter Jim Dwyer, now of the New York Times, then of Newsday, says. It's just people who got stuck in a mistake, and they're still stuck in the mistake. And he says everybody makes mistakes, and you're sort of measured by whether you can own up to your mistakes. And I think that the prosecutors in the city and the press, the detectives, all of the folks involved in this kind of lynching, have not owned up to their culpability. And it's not my job to make them own up to it. It's my job to tell a story of what happened. And that's Sarah's job and that's David McMahon's job, and that's all we've tried to do. It does, as you say, add to your outrage and to your heartbreak.
And one thing about the complicity of the city, and I'm talking about in many respects the media, because it seems to me that this has still been just widely unreported. And
right.
It's one
Completely.
thing that when you can look at
what happened is because the media was silent at the time of their vacation of their convictions, which happened exactly 12 years ago this month. 10 years ago this month, in 2002, a judge acting on a behest on the part of the district attorney as well as the defense, asking for a vacation of the convictions, considering the new evidence that the actual rapist had stepped forward, that there was so much silence on the part of the media that they permitted the reactionary forces to be the only story out there.
Right.
So all the story has been is that, it just must be they're off in a technicality. That they really did do it and somehow they've been so nobody has invested themselves, with the exception of a few, in really sort of saying, wait a second, we need to be aware of the kind of mistakes. There was a case that happened in the early 60s, a man named George Whitmore, who recently, ironically, died about 2 or 3 months ago. The New York Times had quite a full obituary on him. He had essentially had a confession coerced, and for a series of crimes that were really terrible, and the media took up the case and sort of tested his alibis and found out they were sound, and it eventually led to his exoneration and release, and that eventually led to Miranda, the rights that we all enjoy. This case, on the other hand, led to the death penalty being reinstituted in New York State. because of the outrage was so strong over this crime, the symbolism that it meant, the frail white woman versus the black beast. This is the imagery of Jim Crow America. This is the imagery of Birth of a Nation and the imagery of Gone with the Wind. This is an imagery that's still around when you see the way in which race causes Americans to vibrate so horribly, whether it's in our political arena or just in our personal lives. And it's really important to just blow the whistle and say, this is who we are, and hold a mirror up to this circumstance, and we're all to blame. We're all to blame.
The fact that the West Memphis Three could be so celebrated, I wonder if that's not a function of the media concentration in New York being able to judge what's going on in the South, but unable to come to terms with their massive, massive failure in this case.
Well, I think that may be the case. I'm considering working on another documentary about the assault that Mateus Reyes committed just 2 days before, on April 17th, 1989, in which a young detective had actually done the due diligence and found the name of Mateus Reyes, and then nobody followed through. Nobody tracked it down. Nobody went, and we could have averted a tragedy. And I think that that's a case that needs to be examined, because in many ways that may lead to why people didn't question other aspects at the time of this crime, and then later when they were exonerated during the reinvestigation. There's a lot of stuff that stinks and is fishy, and so I want to pursue this. But I do think it has to do with the lack of distance on the part of our media that couldn't believe that this could happen right in our own backyards. But New Yorkers are debating the stop and frisk laws and its efficacy, and many other things that sort of belie what we think of as a liberal, progressive city at the beginning of the 21st century, and not some horrible Jim Crow thing in the South.
I know you've got to run. I want to just ask you finally, as you're doing this film, has it changed the way that you perceive? I mean, because in many respects, this is a bit of a departure in some respects, I think, from your other films. I mean, has it changed your perspective on not just on filmmaking, but on why you make films? And
I think it hasn't really. I do understand that this represents, because of the extraordinary contribution of David McMahon, who I've had the great pleasure of collaborating with for 14 years, and the presence of my daughter Sarah that makes her father very proud. I've enjoyed the sort of new creative stylistic things that are introduced into this film, but indeed almost all of the films that I've made over the past 35 years have had to do in one way, shape, or another in race. That's why the Civil War happened. I felt it was the heart of the story of baseball, with Jackie Robinson's ascension and the Negro Leagues that had been a separate but athletically equal league, but denied a chance to play at the highest levels. It's part of jazz, the only art form that Americans have invented, recognized around the world, that was born in an African-American community. It's part of the story of Thomas Jefferson and Jack Johnson, the first African-American heavyweight. It's the story of Mark Twain. These are all subjects of films I've made. So I think when you scratch the surface of American history, you inevitably, without having to look for it, come up with questions and issues about race. So these are not unfamiliar stories to me, but I do think that their contemporariness is what makes them perhaps more shocking and more visceral for those of us who are struggling to understand the inconsistencies and the tragedies in this case.
Well, it's an incredibly powerful film. I can't recommend that people see it enough, and so I want to congratulate yourself and David and your daughter Sarah. It really is just an amazing film, very, very moving, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about it.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for giving me a chance to talk about this film. We're very proud of it.